Within 5 years, open source AI will have raised the GDP in the world's poorest countries. That is the premise for today's conversation. Welcome to Exponentially. AI is proving its potential, but the most advanced systems are built in the West, running on expensive supercomputers trained on English language data. How could the benefits of this technology be realized in the poorer nations in the global South, with their young populations, tighter finances, and shaky infrastructure? Today's guest, Emad Mostaque, is a founder and CEO of Stability AI, which has accelerated to $1 billion valuation in less than 3 years. And this Jordanian-born Bangladeshi immigrant to Britain has been vocal about the potential that open source AI offers the poorest in the world. But there have been some serious criticisms leveled against Emad Mostaque, most prominently in a recent story by Forbes magazine. These include questions about taking credit for his company's technology, partnerships with international organizations, and governance practices at Stability AI, where he remains CEO. Emad has publicly rejected these as gross mischaracterizations. A debate over the story and others critical of Stability continues to play out on social media and elsewhere. But regardless of the outcome, as long as investors who have poured millions of dollars into Stability AI continue to stick by Emad, he will remain an important force in the expanding AI universe. So can we get started with what is generative AI and how is it different from all of the AI systems that we saw previously?
Generative AI is a new type of AI that started in 2017. There was a seminal paper called Attention is All You Need, because not all data is the same. You pay attention to what's important. So classical AI was built on this concept of big data. So you had all this data of Facebook and Google, and they used it to sell you coconut shampoo. So
Right.
They extrapolated your current preferences, but it couldn't go outside its boundaries.
Right.
So it's like a very logical, the future is like the past, stable kind of environment. This new type of AI said, pay attention to the important parts of data to compress it. So as people listening to this will see, they might take away a few points. They're not going to remember our entire conversation. That's what the human mind does. You've got the very logical part that can memorize stuff, and you've got the part that builds principles, stories, frameworks for understanding.
And this paper, Attention is All You Need, in a sense, analogized that for a computer system.
Exactly. It was the first one that said, this is how you show it at scale. And let's simplify it down to a problem of better data and bigger computers. So using gigantic supercomputers, you can take these big data sets of text, images, and others and compress it down to just a few gigabytes of file that learns principles, not facts.
Right.
And so this was the missing piece in AI, and that's why using these systems feels actually quite surprisingly human.
But how do we get to the generative part of all of that?
The generative part is that you put a prompt in or some words in, and then it gives you something back. It generates the outputs.
Right.
And the outputs are not always even the same because it has principles as a base.
In the same sense that if you and I meet one day, the way the conversation plays out could be quite different to the next time we meet, because we have principles of socialization and of behavior and of how well we know each other, and those get applied in real time at that moment.
Words go in and it goes through the file like a pinball slot machine, and then the output comes. But the input can be a painting of a cup in the style of Vermeer. And then it understands the nature of painting, cup, Vermeer. But cup has so many different meanings. It can mean this cup, or cup your hands, or cup your ears, or a world cup. And it understands those things in place because it's been trained on images and text. Right. Similarly, a lot of these language models, they've been trained on sentences. So they look at the context of the sentence and they say, what's coming next? Like that game of improvisation where you start with the sentence and then you provide something.
I
and
provide
then
the next one and
back
on
and
we
forth.
go.
On we go.
And it's moving so quickly. So last summer I was away in Tanzania on a safari, and there's really no mobile signal. And we were away for about 2.5 weeks. And when I came back, the internet was full of stable diffusion. And that is one of your generative products. What it does, it takes text and it produces images. So I can say, I want an image of a badger playing football on a bicycle, and Stable Diffusion will produce that image.
A lot of the focus and the breakthroughs were because a lot of these research labs, the OpenAIs, Anthropics of the world, DeepMinds, had this focus on AGI, artificial general intelligence. Can you build an AI that can do anything?
Yes.
And it turns out maybe you can. So
making a machine that's in our own image, in a sense, that's what AGI sounds like.
More than that, it's a general intelligence. So it's the kid that made you look bad at school because he was good at everything. The top performer.
Right.
Like GPT-4 now can pass the bar exam, the medical licensing exam, the GRE. It's probably going to Stanford,
right,
next
absolutely.
fall. But then our take was, that's great. You can have these amazing giant general models. What will be better is to mimic humanity, where our companies are not one generalist doing everything. What if we made it so you could bring your own data to the models and have lots of specialists working together and have those models working for you that you own?
Right.
These models, like really talented graduates that occasionally went a bit weird. It's called hallucinations or other things, but that's because we feed them bad data. So we were like, what if you had open data, open models, and allowed it to be customized and specialized? So rather than relying on one model to do everything, instead you optimized them and gave them.
But the idea is still the same. The idea is still constructing a model that is generative. I can give it some text and it can produce something that is commercially useful or emotionally useful. So working software code, or a working invitation to a meeting, or things that will save us time and help us perhaps be a bit more creative.
So again, like a talented graduate, and they can learn very quickly from a few examples. So they have this base of generalized knowledge. They've been through kindergarten, high school, and university, but they're not specialized yet. But you can train them yourself, or you can just show them some examples, and they learn very quickly. Right. Unlike classical AI models that you had to train on the whole data set, they weren't good at adaptation. Like the badger riding a bike, that's not really a normal thing, and so that was being the province of, just us.
Right.
We were able to take these concepts together, whereas a computer could never merge together concepts. Now we've got that missing link of being able to take concepts, merge them together, understand some of these hidden meanings.
So I'm curious about what you think the economic impact of all of this will be. Goldman Sachs had a report that suggested that with one of their scenarios, they could see fast implementation of generative AI across the world, leading to a 7% increase in global GDP in about 10 years. What's your sense of what it could do economically?
I think it's the biggest thing since the Gutenberg press, maybe even fire.
The Gutenberg press 600 years ago, or fire
at the start
2 million years ago.
I think that humans are driven by stories. It's what allowed us to form tribes. And then money and things like that are stories. The press allowed us to write down the stories, but it's very lossy. We do PowerPoints, we write things, but it doesn't capture the richness of humanity. Our organizations are built on layers of text, which is painful. And that's why it turns us into cogs in the machine, shall we say.
Sure.
And
I mean, there's something that's quite powerful about the model you're getting to here, which is that you can feed them text. And through that, the machination of the billions of different switches and cogs, you guys call them parameters,
yes,
in the system, it starts to find those underlying relationships that we know probably deeply in our brains, but don't express. What we do is we express words, one word at a time. And they look at all these words and they're able to find some representations of reality that actually humans use but can't touch and describe.
I think there's that part of it. And the other part of it is just information classification. When you're writing, the hardest thing is to write something terse and compress. It's a bit easier to write big, but it's still difficult. The easiest thing for us to do is talk.
Now, there's the old adage, I couldn't send you a short letter, so I've sent you a long one.
Now anyone, anywhere can create any image, soon any PowerPoint slide almost instantly that looks beautiful. So the fact that it understands concepts is a big deal because the barriers to information flow are reduced, so information can flow better around our organizations, our systems.
As you eliminate barriers to information flow, you're taking friction out of systems, you're taking friction out of daily life, you're taking friction out of business processes, you're taking friction out of the economy. And so we would hope to see improvements in productivity and with that, improvements in prosperity.
So all of finance can be broken down into two things: the securitization and leverage. Securitization is a representation of a asset of some sort. It's money, the trust of the American government. It is a bond, it is a property deed, something like that. But you can only have so much information on that. You and I, we have our credit scores based on the information of who we are, what we do, our functional identities. Most of the world is invisible.
The global south, this is people who are underbanked, people who perhaps don't have formal IDs and so on.
You need identity and you need information to allow for banking. You need that for finance, and our financial systems are quite slow. Can you remember when we were younger, to get money out of a bank took how long? Now it's almost instant. As you get increases in information flow, you get increases in prosperity, because you can direct assets to where they're needed. You can direct resources to where they're needed. It's like I always tell people in the team on the roadmaps are never resource constrained, they're story constrained. Because if it's a good idea, as a leader, I hope I will find you the resources, but you have to convince me first.
You have to be convinced, absolutely.
Yeah.
I can imagine these models in rich, advanced economies where there's a huge service sector. There are lots of people who sit behind computers, typing away, creating spreadsheets and PowerPoint slides. I can imagine these models helping economies like that. But how can we see them helping the global south, or poorer, less advanced economies?
One of the reasons these models have got everywhere is they become good enough, fast enough, and cheap enough. Now, I think it will remove a lot of the basic tasks and make people more productive, as opposed to leading to mass scale unemployment.
And we're not seeing demand for coders drop off, right? Coders can still get work pretty quickly as they need it.
Because you will write better code. And again, a productivity increase. The global south is a very interesting phenomenon. We had mobile phones. You remember, it used to be for the rich only, these big things.
And now in the global south, there are mobile phones everywhere. They're Android devices. There are feature phones that people are walking around with.
They leapt over the PC to mobile.
Yeah.
They leapt over to instant payments, whereas we took a while to catch up. In certain of Western countries, you still haven't caught up to instant payments. I think what will happen is just within the next few years, they will leap forward to intelligence augmentation.
And to the benefit of these emerging markets.
Yes.
So let's think about where we've got to. We've got this very powerful technology that we've characterized. It's extremely helpful in many, many different ways. But it is the case that these systems are extremely expensive to build, to train, as it's called. They require lots and lots of data. The rumors are that the GPT-4 model from OpenAI cost hundreds of millions of dollars to train. But they're also trained on pretty much everything that you can find on the internet, a large part of which will be Western, American, English language, a strong cultural bias. So it sounds like not only can poorer countries not afford this, but even if they could, the technologies wouldn't necessarily be suitable for the economic requirements or the cultural requirements of Tanzania or Bangladesh.
Yeah, I think this is a real problem. I think the quality of data we're feeding to these incredible models is poor. It is scraped from the whole internet. We need better data. We need that as infrastructure. There is a monetary equation of we need giant supercomputers, but more as a question of talent and expertise. It's complicated to build these things. This is one of the reasons, again, kind of we had stability to do an open version and build these data sets for each country on an open basis.
What do you actually mean by an open model, and how does that solve the computational problem?
We released it open source so people could take these models as a base and then extend them.
I'm familiar with open source in software. Whereas with closed source, if you're getting a Microsoft Word, you buy it from Microsoft and you can't inspect the source code, the instructions to make it run. You just run it. But with an open source project like LibreOffice, which is an open source Office product, you just download the code, you can look at the code, you can modify the code, and you can tailor it to your own requirements. So that's open source in software. What's open source in a model?
So in a model, you can inspect the code, you can inspect the data sets, and the model weights themselves are freely available as a fresh trained graduate, as it were.
Help me understand the mechanics of all this, because I think it's important. Stability has its own machine learning AI supercomputer. Yeah. So you run up the costs of training these models for the first time. You then release them as models, data, and weights, which any developer can take and use. And when the developer runs them, they run them on their own computing hardware, and then they're paying for that.
Yes.
In some sense.
But if you want enterprise support, then you work with us and our partners, or if you want customized versions, because it's our view that your enterprise will want their own versions with their own data sets underlying it. Every country will want their own version because this is the next generation of infrastructure. The actual comparison is 5G. This is
5G, the phone
technology.
Networks, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
This is 5G for creativity, as it were. It's 5G for information flow. And $1 trillion has been spent on 5G.
Right. So we can spend a lot more on AI systems across our economies.
Yeah.
If we come back to your open source models, it strikes me that one of the things that you can do with them is you could make them very culturally relevant. You know, back in the day when you register for Facebook, it would ask you what your marital status was, and it was sort of single, divorced, married, or it's complicated.
Yes.
And my mum, who was in her late 70s at the time, is on the phone to me going, what does it's complicated mean? Because it just didn't exist within her sort of mental space. Given how important AI is going to be as infrastructure, I mean, it is going to be the layer between me and the services that I access as a consumer, as a citizen, or as an employee. It's a really critical gatekeeper. And so it needs to be culturally appropriate. So is that part of your vision? An Indian version of ChatGPT, a Brazilian version of ChatGPT, an Indonesian version of ChatGPT?
Yes, my vision is that every person, company, country, culture has their own models that they themselves build and have the data sets for, because this is vital infrastructure to represent themselves, to extend their abilities.
How much of what you're saying is theory? I mean, do you actually have national models being built across the global south?
A lot of this stuff is still in the research phase and now is only just entering the engineering phase. And so there's a lot we still don't know about these models, but they're good enough, fast enough, and cheap enough to do it.
Even if the models are cheaper, you still have to get the relevant data because,
Yes.
The internet doesn't necessarily have lots of information about Pakistani culture and Pakistani broadcasts and Pakistani media.
Exactly. And so what you need to have is you need to have Pakistani newspapers, Pakistani broadcast, and then have Pakistanis come together to build better data sets that teach these models. We know the technology now, but we lack the data. And so that is the key blocking point.
To be able to get access to the data as is needed.
No, to enable it so that as these data sets are built, the models can then come from there, and then people can build on those models for their own people.
It almost sounds philanthropic, right? So what is your model for making money from these open source models that you are effectively giving away after all your hard work?
The whole of the infrastructure here in London, in the West, is all based on open source. And the model for open source is that you have an open version that anyone can use, they can start experimenting with. And then there are variant enterprise versions that you provide full support around other services and facilities integration, and you make your money that way. Because when you talk to regulated industries and others, they want models they own. They don't want to send their data away to other people. And they want to know every single piece of data in there. And they want it to be the best data.
But you're up against firms like Microsoft and OpenAI and Google and DeepMind and others. How do you plan to compete?
I think there's a category error on addressable market. Our addressable market is all the private data in the world. Data you can't send to anyone, be it your personal data or enterprise data, financial regulated data. And so our models will go in and transform that into knowledge. We'll have a hybrid AI thing. We've got our models on your private data, and we standardize all of that, make it very predictable, loads of support. And then you use these proprietary systems for the best outcomes.
So there are companies like Cohere and Anthropic who will build a powerful generative AI model just on a company's own private data. And so why is your approach better than that?
They will not give that company ownership of that model. But there is a core of regulated data and other things, HIPAA compliant data, medical data, that you cannot send to other companies. The feedback we've got from regulated entities, and again from policymakers and others, is open, transparent models are something that we would like a lot, and we would like to own this technology if it's going to be vital infrastructure.
We're in London now. There's a deep bench of AI skills. How do we expand this and democratize it out to countries where there's just less talent in these breakthrough areas?
I think there's talent that just hasn't been accessed. And these models are very interesting. You can use AI to help you develop applications of the AI, which is quite a funny kind of recursion there.
Right. So you effectively will start to support places where perhaps the workforce doesn't have the depth of San Francisco's AI talent with the tools themselves.
Yes, because the AI models are pre-computed. The actual running of the AI is very computationally non-intensive. The creation of the AI is ridiculously intensive.
Right.
So you put all the energy at the start rather than the end.
There are concerns with the safety of AI systems. And one argument is that with closed models that are controlled, there's a lot more safety, because if I'm accessing it over the web, the organization that's running the AI system can stop me if I'm trying to do something bad with it. And with open source models, of course, they're just available for anyone to download. So the cat is literally out of the bag many, many times over, millions of times over. Is your approach less safe than the closed approach?
I think it's more safe because it can be checked, it can be tested, and it can be fully audited and battle tested.
But it does sound like bad actors will end up having a little bit of a field day, which creates, I suspect, an enormous opportunity for an AI-driven security and resilience industry.
The reality is that we're stronger together when things are open, and open is required for all the private, regulated, and other data out there. If you don't have open systems, then you will only have proprietary entities, and they become the choke points on the internet. And that's far more dangerous than the other side. Open is there anyway, but like I said, let's standardize it, let's make it safer, and let's work together to combat the bad, as opposed to leaving it with a few unelected giant companies.
Part of the story of technology is that technology has been exported from one place, really, for everyone else to use. I think one exciting opportunity now is the idea that the people on whom this technology is going to operate could potentially build their own. Now, many of those people are going to be in the global south. And the premise of our conversation is that within 5 years, safe and open source generative AI could make a meaningful contribution to increase the GDP of those world's poorest nations. How likely is it that this vision could become reality?
I think it's incredibly likely. The desire, talent, and passion to adopt technology like this is huge within the global south, and it's where it can have the most impact, the highest ROI. So I think they'll take the building blocks that we and others provide, and they'll build some amazing things to activate their potential.
Reflecting on my conversation with Emad, I'm reminded that much of the software that powers the internet today, used by billions of us, is actually open source. It's proven to be resilient, stable, and importantly, affordable. The open approach is one reason why the internet is, today, ubiquitous. So why wouldn't that be true for generative AI? And if the technology can live up to its promise of improving productivity, wouldn't the open approach make it more widely accessible to the poorest countries in the world? That seems to make sense to me. I'm Azeem Azhar, and you've been watching Exponentially.